We're often asked, what's our favorite state? And I have to say, it's Alaska. We've been blessed to have been there twice. But the problem is, you can't go every year because it's just so darn far away. But I can go there every day, virtually, on my computer, on the internet, and look at these magnificent brown bears at the Katmai National Park's Brooks Falls. In our interview of the week segment, we're going to talk to Andrew Laval. He is a ranger, and he is going to tell us all about these wonderful webcams that allow us to watch those bears anytime we want. Well, let's go up to Katmai National Park in Alaska right now, right at Brooks Falls, the Brooks River, where all those magnificent bears are and are so accessible to us thanks to that network of webcams that are set up there. Andrew, thanks for being with us, and tell us what it's like there. What about that network? What does that network of cameras allow the world to do, and how far away from civilization are you and those bears?
Only accessible by boat or plane. So realistically, most people are not going to be able to visit us in person. And what the bear cams allow us to do is reach audiences, as you said, from around the world. People are able to stream these bears 24/7 during the summer. And a lot of our audience, they get to know the bears quite well. We have 6 different cameras, 5 in Brooks Camp. We have a few up at Brooks Falls, obviously the famous waterfall that many people are familiar with, seeing the bears catch the salmon as they're standing on the lip of the falls there. We also have some down at the lower river, closer to Brooks Camp. And we have a webcam on Dumpling Mountain as well. And then during the winter months, when the bears are all hibernating, we actually have a camera here in King Salmon, Alaska, on the Naknek River.
Now, the bears are brown bears. There's always a lot of confusion.
Yes.
People say, oh, they're grizzlies. I guess they're the same species, if I understand right, but but brown bear is, is their genre, if I can use a commercial.
Exactly. So they're technically the same species. Brown bears would be a subspecies. Basically, the big difference is what they eat, and then accordingly how big they get. So brown bears are typically found within 100 miles of the coast, and so they have access to a lot more seafood, to put it simply. And that means salmon, that means clams, that means coastal sedges. They have access to a lot more food resources than interior grizzlies. And because of that, they get big. Bears in interior parks like Denali or Yellowstone tend to be a lot smaller because they have to travel a lot more to get adequate sources of food.
Now, these bears, how big are they? They look pretty immense on the camera. They look way, way big. They look, and describe the Kodiak bear. Are they related to the Kodiak, or is that the same species?
Again, it's the same species. Kodiak bears are isolated on the island of Kodiak, Alaska, and similar deal. It's all about the access to food and coastal food resources. And so Kodiak bears will actually get even bigger than coastal brown bears generally.
Now, when I look at the camera, I look at it a lot. I just looked a few minutes ago, and there's 1,000 people watching right now in one of the cameras all over the world. But I also sometimes see people in those shots. So
yes.
You actually, as a photographer, if I could get there, there's an overlook and there are people there. How do the bears react to people?
Absolutely. So the Brooks River is a relatively confined area. The river itself, I think, is only about 1.5 miles long. And we get quite a bit of visitation during the summer, during July especially. Some of those cameras are located on what we call the lower river, which is basically where the Brooks River empties into Naknek Lake. And there's a floating bridge currently that crosses the river, and that is how people cross to get to places like Brooks Falls or the Valley of the 10,000 Smokes. So mostly that's where you'll be seeing people, is sort of in the vicinity of that bridge. And these bears are relatively accustomed to seeing people and other bears at close proximity. It's important to remember that bears are normally very solitary creatures. These bears would in other places live most of their lives without seeing other bears or people this close of distance. Places like Denali, for example, if a bear comes across another large animal, it's either food or trying to kill it, right? But these bears, it's all about the concentration of food. They're willing to tolerate other bears at close proximity because there is all that salmon in the river. So they sort of grow up and from cubhood, if you will, seeing these bears at close distances.
Now,
And
I sometimes see these bears kind of swatting each other, and but I never see them really fighting, and it seems like they just kind of yell at each other. On your webcams, there's actually sound as well, isn't there?
There is sound, yeah. So a lot of these bears, it's sort of a begrudging tolerance of other bears. Again, they all want access to that food, so they're sort of forced to live peaceably, if you think about it that way. They will tolerate other bears at close distances. And occasionally, they will engage in conflict. It's inevitable. Bears are very big on dominance, especially amongst the male bears. And if other bears get too close or question another bear's dominance, they will come to fisticuffs. Most of the time with these bears, it is bluffing, and that's when you get some of the most fantastic sound, as you say, because we do have those microphones. Bears will vocalize and sort of open their mouths and growl in various ways. And that is one of the more fascinating things about these cams, is we can see them in their full spectrum of behavior. Sometimes these younger bears will be playing and tolerating other bears, and other times they will be hashing it out.
How have the cameras been used to help Katmai National Park and really creating awareness of these awesome creatures? But they've become so popular. How have they affected, I know the Park Service itself is always looking for resources. This has got to have helped at least people.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is a partnership we do with explore.org. And again, we're a relatively remote park. It's hard for people to visit us. Most people will not have the means to in their lifetimes. So what the cams do is it allows people to connect to this resource and develop an emotional connection to this place. And in that way, they're doing exactly what they were supposed to. People from, Baltimore, Maryland, or Hong Kong, or London can tune in, see what these bears are doing, and learn about this place. So it's a pretty remarkable tool in that way. It's facilitating this emotional connection to a place most people won't visit. And we've seen that. We have communities of people. Some folks will actually meet on the bear cams in the chats and then take their vacations together to Katmai National Park with someone they've never met before. And it's all about this resource. People care a lot about these bears, and what makes the Brooks River special is that we're able to follow these bears from the time they're cubs to the time they get older and sometimes will pass away. And the cams have only been on for about 6 years now, but the Brooks River area allows us to fill in those gaps in these bears' biographies more so than we would in any other place.
Now, July is always a busy month. There's so many of them there in July. Then they seem to even I'm noticing now as we're in early August, the numbers are kind of down, but they come back up. They're feeding on, as I understand, sockeye salmon. Is that what the species they're eating?
Yes, absolutely. Sockeye salmon. So Bristol Bay, our neighbor to the west, is actually one of the most productive fisheries in the entire world. And 51.3 million sockeye salmon were forecasted to come through Bristol Bay this year. Several hundred thousand of those fish will come into the Brooks River, where the cameras are located. And that's a relatively small river. And bears will be feeding on these fish as they spawn in early July, or they come up to spawn in early July. And so they'll first show up generally the first week in July. And by the end of July, they're tapering off. And so right about now, we're going to expect to see bear activity decrease. But later in the fall, about September, we're going to see the bears come back and begin to congregate, especially in the lower river, because the bears are going to be entering what we call hyperphagia, which is the lead up to hibernation. And they're going to be especially hungry. And so they'll feed on a lot of these salmon carcasses. So we see two real peaks in bear activity, July and then again in September.
And the bear, the ones I've been looking at so far this summer, it doesn't seem like they eat the whole salmon. They kind of strip it off, and if they were,
Yeah,
say, eat all your food, you're wasting your food. But
exactly.
what's up with that?
It can be kind of hard to understand. He's very observant of you as well. Yeah, these bears are engaging in what we call high grading. And these bears are pretty spoiled if you think about it that way, especially compared to interior grizzlies, which have less food. These coastal brown bears have essentially so much food in front of them that they can afford to be picky. And their number one goal is to put on weight for the winter. And to achieve that, they're going to eat the fattiest parts of the fish. So that's going to be mainly the brains, the skin, and the eggs. I use the analogy of going to a restaurant and not wanting to fill up on bread. They want to eat the fattiest parts just to put on those pounds as quickly as possible. So you'll see them eat the skin off of a fish, for example, and just let the rest drift downriver. Because again, they just want the fattiest parts. They don't want to fill up on everything else.
How big do they get? How many pounds do they do they weigh as an adult male or as an adult female?
Yeah, I can tell you that they, as big as they look on the cams, it is completely different to see them in person. They are absolutely large, massive. And even these cubs that look so cute and cuddly, when you see them in person, they're like miniature St. Bernards. They're massive. And a fully grown adult male, what we call a boar, could easily tip the scale at about 1,000 pounds.
How does that compare to a grizzly at Yellowstone, for example, that we'd see out that way?
Yeah, it's going to be several hundred pounds more. I would guess that a large grizzly at somewhere like Denali or Yellowstone might be somewhere around 600 to 700 pounds at most.
How can someone get there? And I know that there are a lot of there's people who camp out that way, photographers. That's on my list. I would love to get there and actually get photos of these guys with my own camera. How possible is that, and what's involved in getting there?
So again, Katmai is a pretty remote park. We're out on the Alaska Peninsula, southwest Alaska, and it's only accessible by boat or plane. So what most people do is they'll travel to Anchorage, our regional hub, and then take a smaller airline out to the bush community of King Salmon. And from there, you can take another small airplane out either to the Brooks River area, which is where the webcams are located, or a different area in the park. And there in Brooks Camp, we have a campground, as well as there's the Brooks Lodge, which is the only lodge in the Brooks River area. There's also dispersed camping allowed if you're more than 1.5 miles from the Brooks Camp developed area.
I guess the concern I would have with that is I would imagine mostly tent camping.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen in Glacier and other places, you don't want to be a kid in bear country. So what do they do about the bears wandering to the campground?
Yeah, it's something we take pretty seriously here, obviously, because we have a lot of bears. I think last July, there were about 49 individual bears seen at the Brooks River, which again is a lot for a really small area. The campground in Brooks Camp is actually surrounded by an electric fence. So it's fortified, and we haven't had really any safety issues with that. And part of that is that we take really careful steps to make sure that bears don't get a hold of food or human objects. So they don't really have that association between people and food. And that's important. That's why we're able to do what we do. Wow. If you can be backcountry camping in Katmai, which is an experience, we often will bring electric fences. There are portable electric fences on the market, and that's just additional protection. They're not always necessary, but many people do choose to purchase those.
Well, Andrew, I will be out there someday. I hope to run into you in person, and I thank you for making time to talk by video like this with us. And we're going to show all these great pictures. I am probably your number one fan. I will spend the entire day with the webcam on, sometimes watching the bears, and it's on my bucket list. So I'm coming out there, but I know, as you said, so many people just have fallen in love with these animals. And I want to thank you guys for making and all that work that's involved in the technology so that the world can enjoy the beauty that's outside your backyard up there in Alaska.
Absolutely. We'll look forward to seeing you.
Thanks again.
Well, I am not the only one who likes to watch those bears on the webcam. Most of the time, as I said, there's over 1,000 people who are watching it from all over the world. And I'm actually at the point where I can recognize some of the bears that I've seen from before. Anyway, if you're interested in following those bears, I'll put links in the description below. And I want to thank you so much for watching. If this interview has been helpful for you, if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to our RV Lifestyle channel right here on YouTube. I'm Mike Wendland. Thanks for watching. Happy trails.